there's this great Chinese model that just came out, this company DeepSeek. They're doing really good work. It's a very advanced model.
DeepSeek, which is the leading Chinese AI lab, their model is actually the top performing, or roughly on par with the best American models.
And then these guys come out with like a crazy model that's like 10x cheaper in API pricing than GPT-4o and 15x cheaper than Sonnet, I believe. They have the best open source model, and all the American developers are building on that.
Right.
That's more dangerous because then they get to own the mindshare, the ecosystem.
The AI-related stocks, so NVIDIA, ARM, AMD, Microsoft, global chip stocks also in the red across the board. ASM Holdings.
The thing the market's reacting to is how efficiently this thing was made. Was known for a month. Like, Andre Karpathy wrote about this. So my reaction was like, oh, they did some really cool innovations. We're just noticing now that every year or so we get these things to be 100x cheaper. So I think it was just an overreaction. And I think they timed with the people hearing about the spending that's being done on building new systems for training new models. People have thought, oh, maybe they don't need to spend as much. But the problem is, when you look at the underlying structure of these models, you realize they borrowed a lot from the methods used to train prior models. And when you look at the R1 system and its chain of thought, it looks very much like the chain of thought published in the O1 research paper. The idea that you didn't need all of that to get V3 or R1 sounds kind of implausible to me.
And welcome back to another episode of the 100-Year Podcast. My name is Adario Strange, and with us this week, we have with us a man of many talents, Andrew Mayne. How are you, Andrew?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here, Dario.
Thank you for joining us. I say many talents, and that's not an understatement. Illusionist, technologist, author, primarily, I think, thrillers. World traveler. You've had a television series on the Discovery Channel, A&E. You've worked with some of the, I guess, best-known magicians, David Copperfield, Penn and Teller. What is this all about? Why are you so multi-talented, spread in these different areas?
I thank you for saying that. Very nice things. One is I kind of spin phases. I go into things, I work. I think everybody's multi-talented. Everybody listening to a podcast like this is going to have a lot of interest in different stuff. I tend to pick something and focus on it for a few years at a time to see how far I can go with it. As in high school, as a kid, I liked science. I loved that, but I had the opportunity to go into entertainment. So out of high school, instead of going to get a degree in physics, I went off and built a magic show and toured the world because I had a great opportunity to go do that. Then I had an opportunity to go work in critical thinking education and work for a think tank. So then I did that. Then I wanted to try to teach critical thinking on TV, and I got into TV, and that took me into a lot of other weird directions. And so I kind of just every few years I assess, I go, where am I heading? And then I think about where to do it. And, about 8 years ago, that was artificial intelligence. And that was, kind of led up to me, where I am now.
Have you been, just to stick on the illusionist part, have you been to that magician's house in Los Angeles? Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Magic Castle?
The Magic Castle, yeah.
Yeah. I'm a member. I just did a lecture there a few months ago for their juniors program.
I finally know a member. Yes. Maybe you can get me in there. Yeah.
Whatever you need, you got the hookup.
You have to wear a suit and everything, right?
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Yeah. And let me tell you something. When I moved to LA, being a member of the Magic Castle was awesome for dating. It was just, to be able to tell a girl hey, because I'm a guy that likes Taco Bell and Arby's, but I could put on a suit, go to the Magic Castle, and, now I look way more impressive than I should have.
Yeah, and because of my name, I often get the joke Dr. Strange, so people think I'm going to do a card trick or something. And, I've got a couple of, riddles or whatever, but I don't have much magic. My magic comes through the power of words, I guess. Written
best
words.
kind.
But it's interesting that you have a background in magic or illusions, because I've often thought of prompting in AI as almost casting spells. And it turns out you were, if not the first, one of the first prompt engineers at OpenAI. Is that, well, maybe not engineer, prompt constructors, I guess, or prompt artists.
I started working for OpenAI back in 2020 with the launch of GPT-3. And so I got hired as creative applications was my title. Internally, I was the prompt whisperer. And so I work with incredibly talented people. And sometimes when somebody would reach, hey, can we do this? I was the guy willing to just stay up all night and try to figure out if something could be done. If anything, to just sort of overcome my own fear of, inferiority complex to try to prove that it could be done, So I wrote a lot of the original prompt library that you would see for that, and it's made its way into other AI lab stuff. So it was able to kind of be at a very cool point when that was a cool thing, because it was this wonderful intersection between what was going on with the systems on an algorithmic level and words and language. And so somebody is obsessed with critical thinking and how we think about things. It was just neat to be there at that point to say, hey, I think I know why it wants to do it this way.
Whenever I talk to someone, first of all, I just want to say one of my favorite topics, and I don't talk about this a lot here on the pod, but in my personal life, I love to talk about kind of like the intersection between technology and nature, technology and what we think of as magic. And those two realms don't often intersect. And when you do talk to people from those realms, they generally don't take the other realm that seriously. So I guess what I'm wondering is, I'm fascinated by, at least early on, I was, when I started getting really into AI, which was 2022, much later than yourself, I was fascinated by this idea that you were almost like using words as spells to conjure these generative AI apparitions and creations.
I joke that Harry Potter is our best look at a post-singularity world.
Yes,
because
yes.
everybody's using, so 100%.
We had Roni Abovitz, the founder of Magic Leap, on many episodes ago, and he actually made a very similar analogy that, kind of once we get past a certain point, a lot of this prompting will appear as magic, as, I guess referencing the Arthur C. Clarke quote, any
sufficiently advanced technology, indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at it from, I guess, like 2020 to 2023, kind of like looking past, I mean, this is 2020 is like the height of the pandemic. Almost everyone's working remotely. What did you foresee? Were you able to kind of grasp what might be coming, having early access to some of these tools?
I mean, I had intuitions about it starting back in 2019. For me, it was when I read the GPT-2 paper, and I was obsessed because this was the precursor to GPT-3. OpenAI published a paper that explained that they had scaled up the system, and they found out that as they scaled from GPT-1 to GPT-2, it got smarter, more capable. I read every single output they had. They published them on the site GitHub, and I went there to go read everything it was writing and kind of got an intuition about how the model worked. I started buying some NVIDIA stock back then because I said, if this is using GPUs, this seems like a smart move. And I'm not a financial advisor, but if you've been waiting for a dip on NVIDIA, we can talk about that. But yeah. And so I said, oh, wow, the language models had really moved. I trained smaller models that were like next character predictors, whatever. I looked at how this worked and, oh, this is really, really interesting. And then I talked a bit about it. Then OpenAI gave me early access to GPT-3, and I played with it. And I started showing them capabilities for it, which they started putting into the docs and stuff. I created a site called GPT Tools, which is like, here's ways you can kind of like things that they just didn't have the time to be able to build out. So yeah, I would say that you saw this trajectory, and you could kind of look at it. It's like, I remember, when I was in Japan, around which kind of like the, Netscape and all that sort of blew up years ago. And then I came back and I remember sitting down with a friend, and he's showing me browsing through a bunch of sites and stuff and going, this is probably going to be pretty big.
Now, wait, did you live in Japan or did you just visit?
Yeah, I lived there. I performed back when I was doing magic. I had a stage show that performed. It was called World Showcase.
Okay, I lived there too. I was there for almost 6 years. Where'd you live?
Oh, well, I lived in Minikama in the Gunma Prefecture, so about 2 hours north of Tokyo.
I'm a writer as well, and you write these thrillers, and I'm curious, like, we've had a couple of authors on before, and in particular, we had a book editor on, someone who actually edits anthologies, and we had a long conversation about AI's impact on the book publishing industry. I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts on that? In terms of like what they call AI slop, flooding the market, people publishing books that have been AI generated versus humans. Like, what's your view on the landscape?
I think that there is, looking at the publishing market prior to the idea that AI was going to have an impact, you would see a lot of There are books that were produced, in mass. There are ghostwriters. There's a lot of other stuff. There's a lot of other kinds of human created slop, whatever. There's a lot of that out there before. I don't know where it's going to head. I believe that an AI will be able to write a better book than me, probably sooner than later. But I have up on my shelf here, can't see it here, but I have Brandon Sanderson's Kickstarter project. All the books that he wrote. He released 4 books. That was the most successful Kickstarter of all time. Raised $40 million for 4 books, so basically $10 million per book. He did this by himself. With his team. Was not a publisher. Was Brandon Sanderson. Okay. I bought it and I said, cool. I've never read a single Brandon Sanderson book. I mean to. He sounds like I just liked him as a person. I've seen him talk. I look at how he engages with fans. I bought those books because I like that guy. And there might be a point where we can get an AI that could write as well as our favorite author. But I like the idea that Stephen King, some very eccentric guy in Maine, is writing these books, but I like them. There might be things where I might want to consume some AI generated stuff. I think there's going to be room for a lot of it. And I'll get people like, oh, I'm afraid of this. I'm like, okay, which author would you like to replace with AI? I'm like, well, no, I wouldn't. I'm like, all right. And we certainly see a ton of stuff that come up on Amazon that's AI generated, that's generic. Certainly for reference materials and other stuff, it's probably as good as just having a team write stuff. I think that in the end of the day, we're buying more than one word after another. Part of the story is who created it and who wrote it. And that can sometimes be mythologized and we don't really know. But I'm not worried about the future of the writer.
Man, that answer, we are so aligned. I'm so glad you gave that answer because that's exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
I think, and maybe, sometime in the future, this will change. But right now, unless it's just functional, let's say if you're just on a subway and you're walking past the billboard, if it's functional art like that, okay, maybe it's not a big deal. But yeah, like part of the process of consumption and appreciation of art is also what is the story of the creator? Like did this person live an interesting life?
I do a part of this, a presentation for creatives on this, and I have a series of slides. One of the slides I show is Thomas Edison next to one of the first phonographs, the cylinder phonograph. And it's like, okay, if you're an artist, if you're a musician at that time and you're thinking, oh no, now, because up until the only music industry was really selling sheet music, and then after, or performing live, but you're in your living room, and you look at this like, oh, well, this is going to obviously kill music. And I show, of course, the next frame is Taylor Swift in an arena, surrounded by multi-billion-dollar tour. And I'm like, this created new avenues, because even though I can listen to a Taylor Swift, if I wanted to, song, or CD, or go to watch a music video, people still wanted to pay to be in the same arena with her, because that added a value that does not translate into a spreadsheet that is easily to measure. And this is, we get to the whole, why I think people worry about the wrong things about AGI. Remember, if I can tangent on this, like, what is the most important job in the world? The most important job in the world. If somebody quit this, we would be really screwed.
I'll just say raising children.
Well, it's a great one. That's great. I would say but as a functional job, like farmer,
Okay.
right? If farmers stopped, we would all starve, right? Over the last 10,000 years, everybody was a farmer. And your answer is correct too, like from a social point of view. But in the last 10,000 years, every single person, 99% of all humanity was involved in agriculture, producing food to feed ourselves. And then we had the agricultural industrial revolution. Now, 2% of the population feeds the rest. 98% of the other jobs are just things we made up with all the spare time. And when people worry about AI, I'm like, we invented 98% of all jobs right now. And they're kind of BS things we've made up. And people say, but a robot can do everything faster and better. Like, do you want to go to a restaurant and have a robot sommelier? Do you want that to tell you what wine to drink? If you're going to send your kids to kindergarten, do you want to think that there's not going to be a single human in the room, to your point about raising kids and doing this thing? And I think that we realize that, like, wow, humans are vital in a lot of places. We're going to be shifting jobs left and right, but we're going to try to throw more people at a lot of things where we could use more people.
And by the way, I didn't mean to throw a curveball with my answer. I just think
it's a great answer, though.
I'm thinking about population decline, birth rate decline in terms of like the United States and Japan and most notably South Korea. Well, yeah, I just wanted to key in on the point that you made earlier about farming, and then a lot of this other stuff was kind of things we kind of just, I guess invented to kind of occupy, and build society in different ways. That's fascinating. So you think that we could get back to kind of like a super minimalist point in human history where everything else is taken care of, and like, I'm sure you've seen Star Trek where everyone essentially is taken care of and they basically do what they want, at least on
But
most planets.
if you're a member of Starfleet, you're really taken care of and can have a vineyard. It's a really suspicious economic system they have there. But yeah, I think that you and I are in the middle of a day right now talking. Okay, think 50 years ago, this was not. We would have to work for a radio station or to do something like that. We see these effects around us. I have friends that have their own, do their own. A lot of my friends are podcasters and they make their own living. They support themselves. They're actually doing probably better than some of their friends in traditional media. We see this around us, and yes, I can go use Notebook LM or one of the tools to go create an AI podcast. It'll be pretty cool, but it's not Adario talking to me, and it's not somebody with experience,
Right,
But
right.
that's a real thing. Like I believe that AI will make the best tutors in the world, but I'm still going to want to talk to a teacher that went to Egypt to go look at some of these relics. I'm still going to want to talk to. If I go visit a city, I'm going to have my robot guide on my iPad. But man, I'm going to love somebody who lived there to be my tour guide and to show me. And I think that we forget how good we are at creating new opportunities and how much we actually do like to engage with people.
Yeah, and thinking about the Notebook, we talk about Notebook LM
Mhm.
frequently here, and you, like you said, you want people with lived experiences, and a Notebook LM podcast host can pretend to have lived. They can pretend to have been in like a bar fight, somewhere in Southeast Asia, but some of us have actually
Yes.
had bar fights,
Yes.
and that's important to if you are consuming content, whether it's in a book, podcast, film, whatever, music, I think it's a richer experience knowing that the person has actually gone through a few things.
It's a great point. And I get people like, well, every robots will do every job. And I have to go one by one. Okay, are you going to read an autobiography by a robot? Well,
Exactly.
okay, so you're going to want to read the
Exactly.
auto. Okay, let's start from there.
Yeah.
You go to a fancy restaurant. Are you going to be happy if they said we replaced our staff with robots like McDonald's? Are you going to be happier if you find out that your, my wife for my birthday party got us a reservation at French Laundry, like this super fancy restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like I said, I'm a Taco Bell guy. It was great. It was amazing. I loved it. And I'm talking to one of the waiters there. He went to Cornell and studied hospitality. This guy's extremely well educated. This is who they bring in to go do this. I'm not saying we need to have that at every level of experience, but you certainly look at the really wealthy people, what they do, and say, okay, what do they have that we're going to want? And one of the things is they want experiences with a lot of people around. And, they're, maybe very few people are going to want to be butlers, but I think that a lot of people might say, oh yeah, I would love to, run a small vineyard and create, special wine, or I would love to actually have my own little farm and go to a farmer's market and talk to people about what I grow. I think there's a lot of opportunities we haven't thought about that. Food is entertainment, etc.
Yeah. Agreed. All right. I think we've kept everyone waiting long enough. It's time to talk about the big story, and that is DeepSeek.
There's this great Chinese model that just came out, this company DeepSeek. They're doing really good work. It's a very advanced model.
DeepSeek, which is the leading Chinese AI lab, their model is actually the top performing, or roughly on par with the best American models.
And then these guys come out with like a crazy model that's like 10x cheaper in API pricing than GPT-4o and 15x cheaper than Sonnet, I believe. They have the best open source model, and all the American developers are building on that.
Right.
That's more dangerous because then they get to own the mind share, the ecosystem.
The AI related stocks, so NVIDIA, ARM, AMD, Microsoft, global chip stocks also in the red across the board. ASM Holdings.
DeepSeek is basically a new AI startup. Well, it's not new, actually. It's from a hedge fund founded in 2015 from China. And in the last week, as we record this, it has essentially disrupted the AI marketplace in the United States and globally as well, but particularly in the United States. It's number one. It just the app came out about a week ago. It's now number one on the App Store, above OpenAI's ChatGPT. I think the week after its release, the opening bell in Wall Street for the stock market, many stocks were down, particularly most notably NVIDIA down 17%. Many other chip companies. Let's see. I want to read this quote from Axios. This is Axios wrote this quote: "This could be an extinction level event for venture capital firms that went all in on foundational model companies, particularly if those companies haven't yet productized with wide distribution." Mark Andreessen, famed, actually, a lot of people don't know that he was kind of like one of the early minds behind Netscape and kind of got a lot of
Oh
us
yeah.
on the web. But he's now
He
at the
argued with
big.
Tim Berners-Lee about the inclusion of images. Berners-Lee just wanted a text
Yes.
only. Mark, it's like we probably should have images.
I remember. Yeah. Yes. He's now a big venture capitalist. He wrote on Twitter, X rather, "DeepSeek is AI Sputnik moment." And for
Yes.
those who don't know, Sputnik is kind of what sparked the space race. It was the Russian space vehicle. I believe they had a dog in it, right? Am I wrong on
No,
that?
well, that came later. Sputnik was just that. Then Leica was the dog they sent up later. But
Okay.
yeah, Sputnik was it. I retweeted. I put under there. I think it's more of a Buran moment, which was the Soviet space shuttle, because when Sputnik was the first man-made object in orbit. Well, we have already had these models. These things have already existed. Well, I'll let you finish, and then I'll
Yeah,
get
yeah,
into
yeah.
mine.
So I got another one from Neil Khosla, son of another famed Khosla in the Valley. He says, "DeepSeek," this is also on X, "DeepSeek is a CCP state psyop and economic warfare to make American AI unprofitable. They are faking the cost. They are faking that the cost was low to justify setting setting the price low and hoping everyone switches to it to damage AI competitiveness in the U.S. Don't take the bait." So that's him. And then one last one, and this is from Meta's. I guess you'd call him head AI guy, Jan LeCun, who often has, I guess, disagreements online with various people about AGI and what is and isn't coming. He wrote, and this is actually a week after everyone, by the way, everyone, this was, I have read so many 1,000 word takes from people I've never heard about. Everyone
Who
suddenly,
who didn't write these takes a month ago when the initial paper came out? That's the thing. But get into it.
yeah, and people who just don't write takes at all, just like these
Yeah,
long essays
yeah.
telling us why it's good, why it's bad, what you need to watch out for. So he let all of that happen. And then a week later, Jan LeCun wrote, quote, "Major misunderstanding about AI infrastructure investments. Much of those billions are going into infrastructure for inference, not training. The market reactions to DeepSeek are woefully unjustified." So I have a bunch of questions and I guess my little addition. But what was your initial reaction to DeepSeek, and what was your reaction to the reactions?
So one is when the original first paper came out when DeepSeek v3. Remember the R1 is basically a model trained with outputs from v3 or the v3 like model for creating stuff. So when it first came out a month ago, and again, the thing the market's reacting to is how efficiently this thing was made, was known for a month. Like, Andre Karpathy wrote about this. I went through the paper. They did some really, really clever stuff for optimization strategies, really clever, innovative stuff. I mean, I don't want to get into technical stuff, but they figured out how to make use of of a more kind of limited GPU to do this sort of stuff. And it was like, yeah, these are really good methods to do this. I wasn't like, oh my God, this is it, because I was there when OpenAI I'd actually been, I had left OpenAI at this point when OpenAI went and created GPT-4o Mini. Remember, that was the version of GPT-4 that was made smaller and was 15 cents per million tokens. When I was first at OpenAI in 2020, it was 6 cents per 1,000 tokens. So we went from basically a 500x increase for a 10 times better model, arguably a 50,000%, 50,000 efficiency gain, if you want to look at it in one way. So I'd seen these things. Google came out with Google Flash, which was their highly optimized model. Google has had their own model, Google Flash Thinking, which compares pretty well to R1, which is being used for, it's extremely efficient. It's a very, very cheap model to run to comparably. So I've been looking at it from a technical point of view, like, oh yeah, DeepSeek did some really cool optimizations. These are really cool.
Why is it a Sputnik moment?
Well, I don't think that it is, in my own take on this. And again, I worked at OpenAI. I'm going to have a very opinionated take on this. I think it is an incredible achievement. I think their optimizations are great. When they released the first model, V3, it had the same problems as V2, which is if you asked it enough times, you say, hey, what model are you? It would say GPT-4. if you said, can you show me your API, what API, it would give you the OpenAI API explanation, including the hyperlinks and stuff that wouldn't normally be found and just if it randomly came in from crawling the internet. So my suspicion is, they probably trained on a ton of output tokens from GPT-4 and created kind of in part a distilled model. The model still does really well and it outperforms GPT-4 in other ways. And there are some people are going to hear me just saying, oh, that's just cope. I'm like, no, like I think they built a really good model. I also can show you these outputs and show you Llama doesn't do this. Claude doesn't do this. The only models that do that tend to be models that take, a billion tokens of GPT-4 outputs and basically kind of copy part of that. So my take was like, oh, cool. This is what they did, but that means that they didn't have to spend the billions of dollars that it took to build that initial model. They figured out how to copy a model, take parts of it, and build a new model. I want to be, again, I may be overly trying to explain. I think they did some really clever stuff there, but there are people who are, I'm not in the camp, they just copied everything, or they have a bunch of secret GPUs they're using. I have no evidence to think that that's the case, but I can show you the outputs and show you this. So my reaction was like, they did some really cool innovations. We've been already following this pattern of making these things more and more efficient. From, like I said, GPT-4o to GPT-4 Mini, from Gemini to Gemini Flash, and Anthropic did Haiku. And I'm like, why are we're just noticing now that every year or so we get these things to be 100x cheaper? So I think it was just an overreaction. And I think that timed with the people hearing about the spending that's being done on building new systems for training new models, people have thought, maybe they don't need to spend as much. But the problem is, when you look at the underlying structure of these models, you realize they borrowed a lot from the methods used to train prior models. And when you look at the R1 system and its chain of thought, it looks very much like the chain of thought published in the O1 research paper. So the idea that you didn't need all of that to get V3 or R1 sounds kind of implausible to me.
So I'm a bit confused though, because you say you don't think that this is a case where they just kind of stole, I guess, training data. But
no, I don't. I said that I don't. There's rumors, people saying that they had like a bunch of secret GPUs they used. Okay. I see the fingerprints of it. Literally, I can show you screenshots. If you ask V3, what model are you? It says GPT-4o. Why does it say that? If you look at the evals for R1 on certain metrics, it matches O1 Mini, OpenAI's O1 Mini, pretty closely. That could be coincidence, but it's a thing that makes you think this. But when you look at their chain of thought reasoning, you realize they use the same words used in the O1 preview paper, which would be the smart way to do it. That would be the smart thing. OpenAI read the paper on the transformer by Google, and that influenced their thinking for the GPT architecture. That's the thing that happens. And so this didn't happen out of a vacuum. They didn't come up with all these techniques by themselves. And also you see what looks like suspicious indications that they used billions of tokens from other models, frontier models, to help build this, which is a practical way to do it. But it doesn't mean that you don't need if you didn't have the frontier models, you don't have this.
I can tell you've thought a lot about this. Why do you think DeepSeek released this as open source?
So it's similar in some ways to the reason Meta was doing open source, and probably some strategic ways to do it. One of it is, if you want to recruit talent, open source is a great way to do it. There are a lot of people that want to basically contribute to something that they think is going to have more of an immediate benefit to everybody else. The open source community is just an important part of the ecosystem. I think that if you release open source models, part of the reason Meta was doing this is, and Zuckerberg had said this, is it makes people adapt their tooling around you. So they then start creating, it's why you do an open source for other projects. Why do you release something like a React or something open source? Because then people start building tools and support for it. It makes it easier for you to do your development. It's also a way to strategically, if you're worried about somebody getting ahead of you and you can take the profit margin out of what they're doing, it's a very smart move. If you say, okay, we don't have an API right now, we're still in a research phase, but we can go put this model out there. We can take money away. We can divert money that would be going to these other AI labs away from them. And so it's a strategic way too. It's particularly for, a company that is China-based and ultimately dictated to by the CCP, trying to level up. It's strategically an advantage to the Chinese to make sure that, as much stuff is open source as possible.
So to the China aspect. So one theory I'm hearing is that because China supposedly, I guess I'm not following China news very closely, but
Neither are the
they
Chinese.
well, they apparently cracked down on the finance industry,
Hmm.
and one theory is that a bunch of quant experts were moved over to the AI space, and that's why there's this sudden, brain explosion, or what appears to be such, from China. What do you say to kind of some of these comments that, oh, now China is on par or slightly ahead of the U.S. in terms of AI development and where we're going? I mean,
Well, it's hard to answer the question of who's in the lead without knowing what's going on behind the scenes. One of the things that OpenAI has to do is every time they have a new model, they go through safety testing, and they have to go through this and do things to make sure that it can't be used for things that they don't want to be used for, and that takes a considerable amount of time. So by the time we get we had, when I was there, we had GPT 4.0. I was playing around it in summer of like 20, I'm getting my dates wrong, like 2022 or whatever, or 2021. And then it doesn't release till 2023, or I'm skewing that up. But again, we had it for like 7 months, and we said we've been testing. So I was playing with this thing 7 months before this thing was actually released because of safety tuning and testing. Now in this race, a lot of smaller labs or new labs, Meta doesn't spend as much. I'm not saying their models are unsafe. Let me be very clear, but they're not going to spend the same amount of time if you're trying to score one on the board, where Anthropic and OpenAI take a lot more time to do that, because their goal is they're not as concerned about trying to score, like, look, we're here, we have the best one. They're trying to do safe deployment on that. To the point of who's in the lead, I don't know. It's really, we don't know. If Sam, and we're seeing, they did an announcement to talk about an O3 model. Well, do you think O3 is the most cutting edge model they have, or is there more? Because like I said, they stopped trying to score things a while ago and were more focused on this testing. China has an incredible amount of talent. And the point you brought up about, a lot of people not being able to work in the hedge fund industry, et cetera, when Jack Ma was big into finance and started talking about, restructuring Chinese finance, and he disappeared for several months at a time and came out singing a different tune, it certainly makes you realize that they're trying to realign people. And you have an incredible amount of talent there. And I think, aligning them all in an AI project like this is a very smart move, very, very smart move. And I will say this, is that what we saw here was incredibly smart optimization of hardware. There was some clever stuff they did from training, but essentially the way they approached the data, the distillation, the chain of thought was very much a copy of what had been done before. And so I'm not ruling out that they're not going to come out with more innovations there, but it wasn't like a brand new paradigm, something that popped out of nowhere that we hadn't seen.
Yeah, I think the main, I guess, the big story is lower cost to get some of the same results.
But
But this,
we've seen that was the thing. I think that a lot of times it's people not understanding where the state of things are. Like, I do briefings and stuff for people who you would think would be really on top and know this sort of stuff, in the corporate world and whatever. And you find out that, like, you have people in VC firms and whatever, and you find out, oh, they didn't know what what a KV cache is. They didn't know these other things, and they were over indexing on this, and we'll
so
see.
I want to speak to the China aspect. So it's interesting that this all comes about right after the kind of TikTok hubbub, where they were
Hmm.
supposed to be banned in the U.S. And then our new admin, comes in and gives them kind of like I guess a 90-day reprieve as they try
Hmm.
to work out a potential either sale or now a potential joint ownership. I think one of the names is Microsoft and Oracle possibly joining forces to take over a majority stake with, ByteDance taking a minority stake. But I've always been fascinated by TikTok and Americans in that, having lived in Asia, I know that most Americans almost never think about Asia. I mean, sure, they'll watch, Squid Game, and, maybe they'll, a few people will, as tourists, people talk about the tourism boom in Japan, but it's mostly Chinese tourists. It's not
Hmm.
mostly Americans. So you'll have some people posting to Instagram about visiting, Japan, but most Americans simply, and I know this because when I moved back to the United States, I would talk about Asia, I would talk about Japan, and there was there was fascination, but there wasn't any real deep interest. And they don't really, generally, they don't seem to know who's in charge, what prime minister's here, what president is there, what big event happened in Asia. So I'm fascinated by TikTok in that, the CCP essentially controls, the companies that come out of there. TikTok is a Chinese company, and you're effectively, giving access to, I guess, what is deemed, an unfriendly state actor with regard to Americans. And a lot of these, whether it's kids, adults, teenagers, a lot of people don't seem to care. And they were actually angry when the ban, the very brief ban took effect. And I'm wondering if this is, this approach or this attitude, this laissez-faire attitude towards security is overtaking almost everyone, because I'm seeing all of these people in tech, be they founders, investors, even tech journalists, just installing, the mobile app on their primary phone, not a burner phone or anything. And I'm not talking about the where you can kind of have your own installation where it doesn't call back, to China. I'm talking about like the one like R1 where you put it on your phone. And I'm just
Mhm.
thinking, this TikTok thing has kind of like made everyone, I guess, forget kind of what's
It,
happening.
yeah, it's a thing where on one hand, I'm very much a laissez-faire person. The other hand, I'm a person that stopped working with the Chinese, over a decade ago. Once they started to make a turn, I mean, there was again, they always had, always been a totalitarian, authoritarian state that oppresses people. But there was this hopefulness, and I'd say the early, the mid 2000s and stuff, that China was going to become more progressive and stuff. And when I realized that wasn't the case, stopped going there, stopped doing business with there, whatever. And I love the Chinese people. I've had nothing but wonderful experience with people there. But the CCP is 80 million people controlling a population of 1.4 billion completely. And I watched the TikTok, and particularly seeing people in government positions and stuff using, TikTok on military bases and things like this was amazing to me, because of just the sheer stupidity of doing that, or any social media app or using that capacity. I think part of the problem is that it's not real to people. China's not real. The CCP is
Exactly.
not real. And I see that right now, where you can be in awe and compliment the DeepSeek team for what they built. You don't have to be a shill for the CCP. When the Soviets did Sputnik, we said, what a remarkable achievement. I've gone to Yuri's Night, which is a celebration of Yuri Gagarin's first trip around the Earth, which was amazing. Did not make me want to start embracing Marxist Leninism. And I think that's the problem, is that people kind of become not even will jump into, hey, is there a tribe here? Can I jump into this? Can I be part of this or whatever? Or these things don't seem real to them. And so, again, I'm surrounded by goods that were made in China. I'm surrounded by things that I bought and do this and deal with Chinese companies and stuff. But you have to have, everybody figure out their limit,
Yeah, I share your sentiments in that I really have warm feelings toward the Chinese people. Most of the Chinese people I've interacted with have been amazing, brilliant, friendly, particularly in Asia. The Chinese people I met in
Mhm.
Asia were just absolutely amazing. And, every country, let's be fair, every country has their red lines of like, you know, okay, you have all your freedoms, up until this point, and America included. Let's not be, let's not
Mhm.
delude ourselves. Every country has their own red line of what can and cannot be broached. I don't want to harp on this too much. The only reason I raised it was just to uh, think about the TikTok situation and just how I'm just fascinated that no one seems to think about that aspect of using TikTok. And now that attitude seems to be moving over to DeepSeek, even from
So,
some of the elite tech people.
yeah, so I will kind of steal man. Part of it is the idea, because it's an open source model, is the idea that at least when it comes to the model, you can host it locally, which is also kind of funny, because like NVIDIA stock took this dip. Well, like great, if because we you don't have to pay OpenAI, but if you're going to host this model, then you're going to need to be putting it on NVIDIA hardware. It's this weird thing, but the argument that's being made is like, yes, it's made by the Chinese, it's made by this, but you can take the model, retrain, whatever, and you can post it on your own hardware in America or elsewhere and not have to worry about that. And I agree. The question comes into, and I'm not a person that wants to wave a flag and say you should buy it because of this reason, because that's not a very solid argument, because I should be making the same thing about all the plastic toys and Rubik's Cubes I have on my desk. But I would say that to your point, yeah, you have to think about a cost. You have to think about like, okay, if you're using their app, like, the app is number one, like, yeah, if you're using their app and you're sending all of this information there,
IP
as you
address.
point, yeah, like that's an even better pipeline into there, and you have to understand what you are sharing there now that you're also giving them a tremendous amount of inference information, whatever. And my suggestion is that, like, if you want to use if you want to use it, like, maybe not send your data over to China.
I mean,
Suggestion.
yeah. Yeah, I think the path we're on right now, I feel like TikTok was a great learning lesson, which is, I've spoken to a bunch of security professionals in the past on this pod, and just in my personal life, I know a few security professionals who regularly attend, the Black Hat conference and that kind of stuff. In general, people just don't think about security, and that's fine. But I think it's another layer when you're effectively in kind of like a chilly war with
Mhm.
another nation. So, but I don't see this changing. So I just hope nothing bad comes from this. And it looks like TikTok isn't going anywhere. It may have new owners, it may not, but
Yeah, that's it. The thing with TikTok, I think the thing we want is to make sure that the data stays in America.
hmm,
And also, like, to be curious to what really happens, because remember, TikTok, as far as I remember, may not be making any money. And that's, somebody buying that has to take that on too.
right. So I guess to kind of wrap up the DeepSeek conversation, like, we've seen kind of the knee jerk reactions in the first
Hmm.
week. I mean, the AI space changes so rapidly and dramatically every month at this point. I'm worn out. I started I started running on this treadmill in 2022. You've been doing it longer, but I started in 2022 and I'm exhausted. This marathon is exhausting. We don't get, usually with other breakthrough technologies, you get like a little lull, like a 3-month period where you can kind of reflect on what's happened and everything. You don't get that break here. So I'm exhausted, but I'm still trying to keep up. So it's hard to forecast, but where do you see us in a month in terms of American tech, AI firms, startups, their reaction in a
Um,
month?
so one of the things I've been working with companies, some people who've been trying to do frontier models in other areas, from like materials research and biology and stuff. And we're only beginning to crack the surface of this. And so I look at where I often worry about, oh, this was a thing I thought about, this is a thing I worried about 2 years ago. Now everybody's worried about it. Now that you don't need to worry about it, kind of thing. Um, you know, we're we're moving AI in a lot of different areas. We're still learning how to apply it. When I talk to an average company or business and I find out what their AI strategy is, it's really non-existent. We're just beginning to get people to start using stuff. The models are part of it. In the 1980s, as Japan started manufacturing microchips, they had this fear that we lost the microchip advantage to Japan because microchips run everything. It was like, oh my God, they have the chips. Well, it turned out they didn't have much of a software industry. And that's where it turned out. The application layer was actually where the real value was. You don't want to not have your source to chips. You don't want to not have GPUs. You know, Sam Altman talked about building Project Stargate, which they want to build a $500 billion over several years complex for a lot of compute. And people are like, well, why do you need that now? Well, it's one thing to take a bunch of data from a big model and train a smaller model or more efficient model like DeepSeek did. It's another thing to create all of that data. Like, if I want to replicate in an entire cell, I have to build an entire new model to do that. If I want to replicate the entire manufacturing process from silicon, from sand to microprocessors, I need that. If I want to be able to have robots that actually know how to interact in a real world environment, but not have to put them back on the test bench every time they fall over, on the test floor, I want to simulate that and tie to something. So we're going to need tons of capacity. There's not enough compute out there. There's not enough compute available for the things that we want to do, which is why I think it's crazy. There are people like, oh, maybe there's the people like, yeah, I'm going to short NVIDIA because maybe we're not going to need GPUs. Like, what are we going to be running it on, folks? Like I don't think people understand how much the demand for this is going to increase. You hear the term before. Satya Nadella talked about it last night, which is Jevons paradox, which is
Yes, I read that.
Jevon.
Yeah.
And for your listeners, like, that basically means the cheaper you make something, the more demand goes up. I saw this with OpenAI when they did GPT-4o Mini. they reduced the cost of GPT-4 by over like 10x, 20x, whatever the factor was. Huge. It went from dollars per million tokens to 15 cents per million tokens. All OpenAI saw was an increase in demand. I've been making videos this weekend on OpenAI's Operator, the new tool for working in the browser, the best agent-based system I played with. And I think that after the DeepSeek thing sort of settles down, people are going to get back to the application layer and looking at this. And it'll be exciting because the R1 reasoning model is dirt cheap to run. And I know people in the sciences are going to love having access to something. I pay for a bigger subscription to OpenAI, but now you're going to have cheaper access. I think we're going to see the benefits. I think people are going to start going, holy cow, this AI thing is great. Efficiency gains are going to become normal. I'm very positive about where this is headed. I think that we'll start to, my friends at OpenAI, my friends on this, they're not, nobody I know who's actually hands-on with this stuff is panicking over this right now, because they're like, well, yeah, didn't everybody know this? Didn't everybody understand this? So to our anxiety, it ain't going to slow down, but it will feel normal.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think Satya Nadella's Javan's paradox comment on X was kind of like a voice of reason in this storm of kind of hot takes and exuberance / doom saying. He was like, that was kind of a nice voice of reason. Okay, so DeepSeek, we'll keep our eye on it. I want to begin to wrap up, but I want to ask you about I guess OpenAI itself. They spent a lot of time toward the end of 2024 releasing new products, new ideas, new innovations. And a lot of people are talking about 2025 as kind of the year of agentic AI. I know you've been playing with some of the new things from OpenAI. You've been testing, experimenting what they've released. What do you think about that idea that this is the year of agentic AI, and how does that play out? What does that mean?
So, the simplest way I describe it is ChatGPT's sort of breakthrough was the idea that if you were using, you remember using GPT-3 before, where it was a blank canvas and you just type in a thing and it completes. It would autocomplete, which was intimidating, and it was hard to wrap your head around what it's supposed to do, because as a prompt engineer, my job was to come in and figure out how to write prompts to do stuff. Once we switched over to standardizing around instruct models and models that were trained that you'd have to use special prompting and to use a conversation format, the chat bots, the chat client, that's what people think of. Now, when they think of Chat GPT, they think of AI, they think of the chat interface. And that paradigm was huge. It was a big shift. I was at OpenAI when we talked about, hey, we have this small research preview. We don't think that many people are going to use it. And then ChatGPT comes out and it's a big hit. Even at the Christmas party a few weeks later, Sam's like, hey, probably in a couple of weeks, this will blow down because the internet being the internet. We all thought that. We all thought that this would go away, but it just turned into be a new paradigm. Now with agentic AI, I think the best way to see that is when you watch the videos for Operator, if you have access to it. When you pull up a ChatGPT, instead of this, you go to operator.chatgpt.com and you have your chat, but it's controlling a browser. You start to see this thing do real work. And it's a very, very interesting experience to say, okay, I'm not just writing text and creating documents or getting search results. I'm doing the kind of work that you and I do all day long. And I've got demos up where I show it going and creating Google Forms, working in Notion, grabbing data and stuff. I think as people start to wrap their brains around it, like I've had it for several days and I have not even begun to scratch the surface what's possible. That's what this year's about. This year's about understanding when a chatbot controls your browser.
Gotcha. We have heard Sam Altman hint at AGI, artificial general intelligence, for most of 2024, a little bit of 2023. And there's even one of his engineers, I think, made his own claim that he thinks they've achieved AGI, but that wasn't backed up from anyone else at the company.
And yeah, I think he should have provided more context. Yeah.
Yeah, and then right before DeepSeek, I think it was, Sam Altman came out and said, look, everyone calm down. We haven't achieved AGI. It's going to be a while. We're working hard. But let's kind of, I guess, set some context. Now that DeepSeek is out and may make, for the companies that have spent on infrastructure, to train data, inference, now that they have access to this as an open source tool, can't that possibly get us to AGI quicker? And what say you to just the general comments from OpenAI as a group about reaching AGI fairly soon?
So what Sam had said, if I remember correctly, was that he sees the path. We finally understand there's a path towards AGI, and that one of the questions had been out there was how well do transformers, the transformer level, the current architecture scale? Can that get you to a point where you can solve all these higher level reasoning problems that we need to solve? And we saw leaps from GPT-2 to GPT-3 to GPT-4. And a big leap was what we call inference time compute. And that's what the O1 and R1 models do, where basically you take a GPT-4 scale model and let it think about a problem longer by breaking the problem down, approaching steps, coming up with tests to figure out if this works or doesn't work. And it's cool to watch it work when you say, hey, I'm going to, a great problem you can give DeepSeek is say like explain memory palaces without using the letter E and see if it try to do it, and it will fail. But you see it go through like I'm going to try to use this, do this, or say explain the plot of Star Wars in a sentence using the first letter of the alphabet, each letter. But anyhow, you can watch it go through these steps, and that was the big innovation was these current models we have can actually outperform themselves if you give them more time to solve these problems because they are good at breaking down smaller parts of it. And I think that now that you have, inference time compute, because O1 came out, now you have R1, Google has their flash thinking models, people are looking into this. I think we're going to find out that a whole category of problems that we thought were going to be harder to solve will become easier. Now, the question is, one of the things that we've said before when we define AGI isn't just a system that thinks on the level of a person, it has to be efficient. If it takes you 10 minutes to answer a question that you or I can answer in a second, still not there. Inference time compute, emphasis on the time, will get us some way of the way there. It might create training data to build us there. But to my answer, do I think that we're going to be closer to much smarter systems and on a path to AGI by widely accessible stuff? Absolutely. The challenge will be that, this higher level thinking now also in the hands of bad actors. That's inevitable. And it's not an excuse to say, we shouldn't have access to it. But I think the more people playing with these tools, the better. Everybody here, don't make these things theoretical. Go play with these tools. Try to use versions, if you're going to use DeepSeek, things that are hosted in the United States to avoid sharing your data. Play with Meta, play with OpenAI, play with Anthropic, play with all these tools, and learn how they use it. The more educated we are as users of this, that's how we get there faster, more responsibly.
Yeah, agreed. What do you think about the conversation around superintelligence and what happens to humans once we supposedly, if we ever do achieve, superintelligence? Meaning, will you tell me what your definition? I'd like for you, because everyone there are murky definitions. What is your definition of AGI, and what is your definition of superintelligence?
So, a popular definition of artificial general intelligence is a system that within an environment, like let's say a computer or browser or whatever, can perform as well as an expert human, as a good human at that task, right? So if I say, write me a 500-word essay on this, it does that. If I say, go balance my bank account, in QuickBooks, it can go in and go do that. It's something that's generally intelligent, can say the same thing the smart person can. ASI gets into when you have an artificial superintelligence, something that's, imagine something that's like an Einstein or Stephen Hawking or Richard Feynman, a really, really capable thinker that can come up with entirely new paradigms and be able to solve these problems for you. Give it, 50 years of clinical data about HIV and say, can we find a better treatment for this? And a system that can basically do that. And that's what superintelligence comes into play. I think we're well on the path to AGI. I think that we do see if we tried to describe AGI to somebody 20 years ago and we showed them GPT-4o, they would be convinced that was AGI. Now we have the closer you get to something, the more of the resolution you see it, and the more you realize, well, no, we need this, this, this. As far as ASI, the impact of these things is, I use a term I call organizational intelligence or organized intelligence. And right now, the people who work at, DeepMind are super smart, incredibly smart. They're producing incredible AI models, things like this. If we put all of them on Slack and I ping them a question, just about any question I could think of, they're going to come up with an answer faster than I can and smarter than I can on just about any topic I can think about. Do I panic because there's a group of really intelligent thinking people or thinking systems that are able to respond and do this? No, because we've dealt with that for years. We call them teams, we call them companies. These are organizations. You can bring a group of people together. It was, there's a meme going out that like, oh, a small, OpenAI is this 4,500 person company and it took them billions. And meanwhile, DeepSeek did this with 200 people. Well, one, that's false. I was at OpenAI. There's about 250 people, 300 people. That's how many people built GPT-4. It was a small team that built GPT-4, upon which DeepSeek borrowed a tremendous amount of ideas and inspiration and tokens to go build their model. Right?
Allegedly.
But the point is, I will go out in the firm and say, let them. I can explain to me why it says it's GPT-4. Tell me why.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to put that in for the Okay.
You can put it. I would say pretty weird and random. They would tell it to respond that it's GPT-4. But again, they did incredible things on top of it. Right. Happy to see them in court over that. And again, I think they did an amazing technical achievement, and it does show what a small team did. I think the company that felt the most embarrassed by this was probably Meta, because they got out-meted by Meta. Because and I've heard people go, no, they're just Meta just wants people to have free models. They should be happy. Like, yeah, I'm sure Zuckerberg is thrilled that they got pantsed by this team over there. But it does show you what a small team can do. And that's the credit. You reached through the technical things they did there, and that's great. So I don't have an existential fear of other people being involved in teams doing cool stuff, particularly if we are aligned. Now, there's a little bit of fear that it's a Chinese team and not an American team or whatever. But I think the people there are probably good intentions, and I don't want to malign them. So when it comes to thinking about the future, we've been dealing with organized intelligence for most of human history. And what matters is alignment. Does it want the same things I want, et cetera? The more we build these systems, the more we realize they're not like Hannibal Lecter meets Spock. They're complex systems. There's layers to them. We have different ways to understand how they work. You can build other systems to watch them. I'm less worried about the existential risk today than I was a year ago. And
by the way, Hannibal Lecter meets Spock is terrifying, by the way.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting you brought up Deep Mind, because the so-called godfather of AI, Jeffrey Hinton, famously left about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, then went on to win the Nobel Prize for his work on neural networks. So if that's your attitude, why do you think he seems so concerned?
I think that part of it comes into play when you build a thing and you think yourself the only principled actor building it. I'm not saying that's his point of view, that you often worry about the intentions of other people. And I saw that at OpenAI, where I had watched people ascribe intentions to people internally there that was not the case. I think that you see this thing run and you can't control it anymore. But also, we haven't controlled intelligence for the last 10,000 years. And there have been some ups and downs, but it's actually turned out pretty good. And I think that for him, it is this thing that accelerated at a faster pace than he realized. I think some of them, like this is a guy that, pioneered these methods, but some of these people, it wasn't in their playing card, their bingo card, that this was going to happen this fast, which can be a little bit disturbing. I've watched the shift in safety to more technical people. I've watched people who are much more technical get into there. The problem with safety research for a lot of times was people writing, their safety research was done in Microsoft Docs. It wasn't people actually testing and building stuff. I feel a lot more confident now. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for mischief with these things. I think that that's going to happen, is we're going to find out that somebody wrote some new virus or something using some AI system, and we're going to have a panic over that. But, my existential calculation is this. What is the net number of lives that I think AI is going to save over the 100 years versus what people think is the likely of a doomsday wipeout scenario? And I think that it strongly comes to the idea that we're much more likely to have our lives saved by AI than killed or Skyneted or whatever.
I love that optimism. I want to wrap up by just keying in on what you just you mentioned mischief, and I will say I kind of fibbed a bit in the beginning of our discussion. I have dabbled with magic a little bit, but maybe not the kind of magic most people are familiar with. Do you know what mentalism is? You know what mentalist is?
I wrote a couple books on mentalism. I love mentalism.
Okay, well, great. Okay, so that's the space that I've kind of dabbled a little bit in. So is that your primary area of magic, illusion? No,
I was staged magic, did staged magic and stuff. But then when you remember Amazing Randy had $1 million challenge where he could prove like anything of the paranormal. So he had this challenge, and I worked with him for a number of years. And so what I had to do is go replicate things that psychics and other people would do, which would be mind reading and go into laboratories where people claim that they could do this stuff and develop tests for it. But yeah, I'm a big, huge Darren Brown fan and love mentalism.
Well, the reason I brought us back to magic and mischief is I'm just wondering, do you think, okay, we're away from ASI and this AGI stuff. Now I'm just thinking about humans working with AI. Do you think is there some form of new magic, alchemy, was it prestidigitation as it's been called sometimes, that you imagine that where you'd apply AI along with kind of some of the traditional illusionist
So,
methods?
one of the things that I would say people need to be engaged in this stuff more to learn more about is we know that AI will become super persuaders. We know that an AI, if you got a phone call, a year from now from an unaligned AI telling you to give you your bank account information, whatever, it will be the most persuasive call you've ever gotten. And we have to think about how we build safeguards to protect ourselves with that. Because there will come a lot of deep psychological understanding. And I'm going to say terms like magician's choice and things like this. There are ways in which you can manipulate, and magic will be able to take this upon and hopefully be used in good ways. So yeah, I think there's going to be ways to figure out like ways that we didn't realize before that we could be fooled or be entertained and design stuff. So I think there's going to be a cool complement there. And
Yeah,
can I do one last thing too that
yeah.
I have behind me? I have a bunch of books on memory methods. And so that's one of the things I've been really getting into is the idea that as I use these tools every day to help me do work, I also spend part of each day learning how to do things like memorize a deck of cards or people's faces and stuff. I've tried to figure out how do I have the most zero tech ways to do interesting things. And I'm excited. I use one of my first tests with AI tools is help me figure out how to build a memory palace for this or whatever, and then just sit there and quietly think about it. So I emphasize, learn these tools, but also learn how to use your brain.
Can we wrap up with a trick? Do you have any kind of card, anything you can show us on camera that
I
might
don't really do like magic over the internet. Like that's just
Okay,
like
okay.
it's not like I could just reach into the air and cards.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, oh man, this is great. Great. I don't know. Like part of the reason there's this is super tangent. Bjork, the singer from Iceland, just came out with her new album. She just released a hour-long concert on Apple TV. Midway through the concert, she posts like this message, a written message, and she talks about the intersection of nature and technology. And so I'm just fascinated by this idea of using our human tricks along with technology to produce these interesting results, reactions, interactions, and experiences. So that's why this last part is so interesting to me.
I have a funny. I mean, not funny. I have an Iceland tangent, which was I handled the launch of GPT-4 from the comms team per point. So I worked with a product manager on that. It was amazing from the GPT-4, and then we had to figure out all these examples and things we could do with GPT-4 to show people what it was capable of doing. And so I had to produce the videos, write the copy, do all this stuff, but also just go out there and find people to work with to do interesting stuff with. One of the companies I brought in was Be My Eyes, which worked with the blind people to help them work with an app that would let a sighted person guide them through doing something like cooking or things like this, which is another thing. You think about how uplifting it is for somebody to not have to be dependent upon another person to do something, and that's a great thing. But one of the things that I brought up was, what if we start training the model on these languages that are starting to vanish, like Icelandic? Younger people don't want to learn this language. What if we could preserve this, do this, whatever? And I didn't say Icelandic. I just said these languages are going away. Well, we had the prime minister from Iceland visiting the offices like 2 days later. And so we went to him. We said, hey, would you like us to train GPT-4 on Icelandic so it understands Icelandic and will always be there? And they're like excited, and they did that. And so Icelandic was one of the first, kind of the not less widely used languages. We did that. And that's part of what I love is we can put human culture into these things, and we can train models on languages around the world. And while, there might be, younger people may not want to pick that up, a kid 40 years from now, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, living in, Madagascar might get all of a sudden fascinated by, Scandinavian culture and, decide that he wants to learn Icelandic, and it's going to be there in an AI ready to teach him, which is awesome.
Yes. And language is magic. Andrew, I really appreciate everything you shared with us. This has been great. I have to like dig more into your books, man. I want to see kind of like where there's a new series. We'll probably cut this out. But there's a new series called not Prime Suspect, Prime Target, and it's about a mathematician at Cambridge in the UK, and it turns into this kind of like what's the Tom Hanks? He played the role in the movie about the secret codes.
Da Vinci Code, yeah,
The Da
yeah.
Vinci Code. It becomes this Da Vinci Code kind of story. So it's math meets mysticism meets history, and I just feel like I don't know. I feel like AI will kind of help us kind of parse through some of that and maybe learn more about ourselves that we still don't understand.
There's an interesting angle too, which is some people are using AI to go look at fragmented manuscripts and to try to piece together our past. And there are things that we may not have thought were accessible. And one of the things that really got me deep into the idea of AI was to think of how much could I use this to simulate travel through time? Could I use it to recreate, a town in Mesopotamia? Could I go to, Angkor Wat? Could I go to some other point? And again, I can't really go there, but I might have an AI that could take enough fragments of this thing to do it. And one of the things we did DALL-E was we started using it to do back when we first launched that, like to show like photographs from different periods of time. And now with tools like Kling and VO and Sora and whatnot, that's a thing. And so I'm excited about this idea of how much we can use this tool to unlock about ourselves and our past.
I'm sorry, super tangent, but I'm so locked in on what you just said. This is why I'm still so engaged with virtual reality. Virtual reality is something I've done a lot of reporting on for like whatever the last 10 years. I am excited about the marriage of virtual reality and AI in exactly the way you're speaking as a time machine. I view VR as a potential real time machine where we will actually be able to meet certain figures in a very realistic way, not just image wise, but in terms of what their thought process might have been, and make it somehow, I guess, akin to the holodeck from Star Trek, to bring up Star Trek again.
I pitched back when I was in TV. I had a because I did for your listeners I did a thing for Discovery Channel for Shark Week where I built a suit to make myself invisible to great white sharks. And I started exploring other kinds of technology thing. And one of the things I played with was the idea of using projection mapping, volumetric displays, some other stuff, and AI, and go to historic battlefields and stuff and recreate in real time a simulation of what took place with agentic soldiers and other stuff and all that. And I think we're going to see stuff like that. I think that we're going to find out that we can go beyond the screen, go into volumetric computing, and we can start to make things real, like you said, in ways we never even thought about before. I got the Apple Vision Pro, like many people did. And I was really depressed because they just did nothing on the software. They really didn't think through. There was very minimal. There wasn't anything like, it wasn't like, for me, the selling point was I had the original, Oculus development kit, but really once I tried on a system that had full 3D spatial movement was Tilt Brush. And there wasn't that moment there, but I think that there is an opportunity there. And now that you can use computing to sort of fill in that stuff, like I could go on, Dario, we could talk about that forever. Like, yeah, I've got I've got like every major 3D release ever, the VR goggle, whatever. I've got them stacked over there. Like, I'm same with you. I'm very excited about all this.
Just to be clear, I also own the Vision Pro. Did you return the Vision Pro?
Nope, kept it.
Good man. Have you seen The Weeknd, his immersive video?
No, I helped work on an AI project with him. I got to check on that. I'll see how that is.
It is the best and I've been in the space, the VR space, for a very long time. It's one of the best VR music videos I've ever seen, and it's only on Vision Pro. It's amazing.
Cool. I'll check that out. Yeah.
So are there any like URL, social media, any like where can we find out more about you, follow your work, what you're up to?
AndrewMayne.com. It's my kind of the entry point. You'll find, my latest books there, and you'll find I'm on X. X is probably the only social platform I'm really on that I publish. And then YouTube. I put out instructional videos. I have some more stuff coming out about that. I just like to teach stuff. So that's it. But yeah, I'll say if you read my books, you'll see stuff in there technology wise. It happens like 5 years later. I had, before deepfake was a thing, that was a plot element in a book that I wrote in 2011. And then I have a series called The Naturalist, which is all about a computational biologist. And it's very accessible. Don't worry if you're not in computation. It's exciting. But I love to put technology in there. And so, I'm on Amazon. Everywhere, just type in Andrew Mayne and you'll find one of my books.
Give us one book as an entry point for someone who wants to kind of sample and perhaps dig deeper into the rest of your books? What's the one starter book that you'd give them?
I'll give you two. One is The Naturalist, which is about a computational scientist who starts hunting serial killers, because it was just a very fun premise of intersection of science and that. The other one is The Girl Beneath the Sea, which is a woman who's the South Florida police officer who gets pulled into an investigation and has to learn how to be a detective. And so, because
Is that the one you were nominated for the award? Is that?
I was nominated for Naturalist, was a thriller and Edgar finalist.
That was the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
And then maybe Girl was a thriller. I am like the least reflective person, so I'm a terrible. You will not see.
That's the way to do it.
I don't think there's a copy of my book in my office, and it's not like, it's just I don't. I'm always thinking about the next thing.
That's how it is in sports. That's the best way to do it. You just chalk up the win, chalk up the L, whatever it is. Do it, execute as well as you can, and then move forward. So same attitude here, man. Andrew, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us. You can check out previous episodes of the 100-Year Podcast at 100year.com, and you can check out our Substack at 100year.substack.com. Thank you again, Andrew Mayne. I will be keeping an eye on what you're doing. I'm probably going to try to check out the first book you mentioned. And for the rest of us, we will see you next time.